Thank you. I think the keyword was complicated. How many of us are UX designers here? So around 70, 80%? OK. Because I'll have some questions that you can do a little bit of introspection with. So as you can see from the cover, the relationship between data and design is a complicated one. And what we'll try to do today is we'll actually try to see what are these complications and how we can overcome these, right? I hope this works. For some reason, this is not, oh, OK. We just. Keynote. Thank you. So my name is AMOL. I'm from Dubai, where we started RBBI 5 years back. So far, we are the only UX and usability consultancy firm in Dubai and in the Middle East. I wanted to start with this beautiful quote by Dan Ariely. Data is like teenage sex. Everyone talks about it. Nobody really knows how to do it. Everybody thinks that everybody else is doing it. That's why they also claim that they're also doing it. Because data, as many of the big things, has implications on each and everything that we do, each and everything that we design, each and everything that we create. By the same time, because of that big implication, or those big implications, it can also be overwhelming. And that's where the complication starts. Because data is so big, it overwhelms you. So the trick is to actually find and identify usable insights from the raw data. And over the next 17 minutes, that's what we'll try to do. We'll try to identify what are the sources of this data, how these sources can be used for your own design purpose, and most importantly, we'll look at some of the challenges that we face. So as I said, we'll start by doing a little bit of introspection. What kind of designer are you? Are you a hipster designer? Again, I want these questions to be asked to yourself. Are you a hipster designer? Everybody is a designer these days. But how do you identify these traits? Hipster designers would express themselves, right? They would do things because of self-expression and not because of function. So function comes second to them. And they'll try to add extra coolness to everything that they do. That's where you can identify the hipster designer. Are you this guy? Ego designer. I heard few people laughing, so. This person always says that I'm always right, because he has big ego, and most importantly, he thinks that I think as a designer, this is the right thing to do. Based on my knowledge, based on my experience, this is what we should be doing, right? So this is the ego designer. Or are you, in true sense, a UX designer? Now, UX designer will ask questions. UX designer is always neutral. He will not bring his own likings, his own preferences into his work, because he wants to solve the problem and not look at self-expression, right? And most importantly, this designer has a relationship with data. Now, relationships can be at different levels, right? You know, I'm sure all of you have been at least once or twice in a relationship, maybe more. So what is the kind of relationship you have with your data as a designer or as design? Let's look at these relationship types. The first one is data denial. There, you completely distrust data. You don't want to even see their face, right? You know, there are relationships where you don't want to see each other's face. So this is the relationship where I call it data denial relationship. where you distrust data and you do never use it in your design. The second stage, or the next stage, is indifferent data, right? Or data indifferent. There, you don't care about. You know that data is there, but you don't care about it. You don't think that I have this need to use this data into my design. And this is where most of the ego designers come into picture. This is data-driven. This is where people blindly follow data into their design. They don't think twice. They don't look at innovating. They don't look at anything else, but they think, this is what data is saying. This is what I need to design. Now, there's one more trait to this. There are designers who use data whenever they think it's important to use the data to convince their client, to convince the stakeholders, or convince themselves. Whenever they think that this data is supporting my opinion, I would use it. And this is the data-driven designer. What we want is a healthy relationship, right? We want it to be data-informed relationship. In this relationship, what happens is you use it to shape, design, and inform all your decisions. Now, when I say all your decisions, the key factor here is to shape, define, and inform. Because you don't follow data blindly in this case. You actually take data and look at it from different lenses, different perspectives, and try to use it to improve the experience and not blindly use it. Now that we looked at these different relationships and different traits, let's look at some of the challenges, right? So as every relationship goes through challenges, data and design relationship also has many challenges. And what are these challenges? The first and foremost challenge as a designer is we think data is all but numbers, right? So we think if it has to be data, it has to be numbers. I don't see any numbers, which means there's no data. This particular trait is actually known as, people normally use quantitative data, and then when they look at data, qualitative data, they think there are no numbers, which means this data is not actual data. But the most important factor that we forget is quantitative data only gives you what and who. It doesn't tell you why. That's where qualitative data comes in. And that's why if you think that data is only numbers, that's one of the biggest mistakes you can do. The second challenge that we have, or that we normally face, is we don't measure right things, right? We normally measure wrong things, and that's why the data that we get is wrong. I'll give you an example. In former Soviet Union, when the Industrial Revolution was going on, they had glass factories. And the manufacturers, or the owners, had set a simple rule, or simple KPI. They wanted to award units, or the manufacturing units, that make the most metric ton glass, right? The result was the glass was so thick that it was not even transparent. It was hardly transparent. Then they changed it. They changed it from being metric ton to square meter. And what happened? The glass became so thin that it was so fragile in transportation, it would break. So the problem was not the manufacturing. The problem was what they were measuring. The KPI was the problem. So if you don't have right KPIs, if you don't have right things to measure, your data is going to misinform you. And we saw that a lot of the times we actually follow data blindly. What it does is it stops you from innovating. Because of this, you start becoming optimizer than the designer, right? Because if you have a product, if you look at your data and constantly keep changing it just by blindly following your data, what you're going to do is you're going to turn yourself into an optimizer and not as a designer. So that's where the innovation has to kick in. That's where you have to think. And I think Henry Ford once had said, if I would have asked my users what do they need, they wouldn't have told me that they need a car, or they wouldn't have told me that they need a they need a vehicle which runs on wheels. They would have told me, I need a faster horse cart, right? So that's where the innovation has to kick in. You understand data, you take the data, you analyze it, but don't use it blindly. Now, if you understand these challenges and you decide, okay, now I know these are the challenges, this is what I need to do, I'm a UX designer, not an ego designer or a hipster designer, and I know what my relationship is with my data. Now, where do you find this data? Data is everywhere. Now, what I have done is I have just put some examples in my coming slides, but at the same time, let's understand where we find data. The problem is, or the challenge is, 20% of your data is structured, right? So whatever data you get from your different methods, only 20% of it is structured. And the structured data is what gives you normally the quantitative information. The 80% of the data is non-structured, it's unstructured data. So let's look at what is this 20% data. 20% data is what most companies brag about. 20% of the data is what most companies say, I have data, I have big data. And what is that? It's actually their ERP system, their user data. They have reams and reams of megabytes of database that they have. They have demographic information. They have their Excels and subscription lists and ERP solutions. That's the structured data. And then you have your unstructured data. Unstructured data is where most of the qualitative information or most of the insights come from. The clever designer or smart designer would actually look at your unstructured data and take informed decision. Now, if you look at qualitative and quantitative, let's plot them on a scale, right? So on one side you have your qualitative data, and on the other side you have your quantitative data, and then you have attitudinal information and you have behavioral information. Now, all of this information, all these four corners are very important. Depending on the problem that you're trying to solve, depending on what you're trying to get out of your research or data, you need to decide the right method. Now, if you just look at the different methods that we have, these methods are, the first is what you see in green, and what we'll plot there is natural use of product. This is where you actually get users to use the product in natural environment. Then you have not directly using the product. So there are data sources where people are not directly using your product. By the same time, this is contextual data. Then you have your scripted use of product, the user testing that happens in labs, most of the cases, right? Or remote user testing. And then you have your hybrid. Now, these hybrid methods are methods where it can be either done with letting people use the product naturally or scripted. So if you look at where people use your product naturally, these are the methods that you'll find. Ethnographic and field studies, where you can actually get people who have used the product and ask them to give you information. You can look at your diary studies, Google and site analytics, very quantitative data. Then you have A/B testing, again quantitative data. As I said, you need to decide, based on your product, based on the problem that you're trying to solve, which data and which method is right for you. The next one is where people are not directly using your product. This is where your focus groups come into picture. They may or may not have used your product, but you're trying to get attitudinal information from them, which is qualitative. Then you have your personas. You have your card sorting exercises and few others. Don't take this list as the complete list of methods that are available. I'm just trying to put together a list which is commonly used by UX designers. Then you have your scripted use information. And most of that information, again, is qualitative and behavioral, right? Eye tracking data, usability benchmarking, usability lab studies, and then you have your hybrid methods. Co-design sessions, surveys, remote user testing. Remote user testing can be done scripted, non-scripted. I'm just trying to speed up a little bit so that we have a few minutes for question and answer also. Now, how to use this data? We looked at the challenges, we looked at the relationship type, we looked at where to find this data, but how do we use it? When I look at this data, or when we look at this data, first thing that we need to remember is data is not going to design for you. The design is done by humans, right? So first and foremost thing that you keep in your mind is, look, I have this data, but data is not going to do the design work for me. I still need to use my human brain to design, and that's where things start getting better. Trust me, I found this in a small salon, and this is such an apt use of data that this owner must have, or designer must have gone through. What he has done is basically consider the whole user journey. Don't just look at your a product, which is a website or an app or any other interaction with the user. Look at the complete user journey. You may find data outside of your product, which is important to improve your product. Has anybody heard of the term called local maximum? Local maximum is a term used in mathematics, which actually gives you, from the information that you have, what is the maximum that you can get. So most of the times what happens is data gives you information and insights from what you have. Take that as your base. Take that as your platform, and then leap from it. Don't take that data. So otherwise, you'll only reach local maximum, and you will not reach the optimal maximum that the product might have. Please remember, users always doesn't know what they want, right? Because if you just, and then again, it comes back to blindly following this data. If you just listen to your users, so in this case, if people wanted a radio in their car, and if somebody would have just slapped it there, it would have failed. Start early. The most important thing about finding data is starting to find that data and those insights early in your project lifecycle. The earlier you find data, the earlier you identify these insights, you will have less and less repetitive work or iterations in your cycle. Use the data which is relevant. So this was in UK. There was a Sweet Express shop, and somebody had live weight loss event, live weight loss event advertised just outside it. So relevant data can actually give you a lot of mileage. These are two ATM keyboards or keypads. One on your left-hand side is what they use in Hong Kong and other part of Asia. The one that you see here is what they use in Middle East and I think this part of the world. But there's a fundamental difference in these two. Look at the way numbers start on this one. It starts from the bottom, and there it starts from the top. And I'll give you a very practical incident that happened with me. I was using this ATM. I'm used to using this ATM in Dubai. I was using this ATM in Hong Kong, and I typed my PIN number wrong twice because there were people around. They had a flap that actually covers your hand, and without even understanding anything, I was just typing my PIN number, and twice it came wrong. And I said, no, it cannot be true. The most important thing here for us to understand is keep the context in mind. So different geographics, different demographics may have different data that you can identify and design based on that. Having said that, wish you a happily ever after with your data as a designer. That's it. You have any questions? Any questions? Yeah.
My question is a bit different, but when I have to try, I have to make a data design. That's right now what I'm doing. And what's the main thing I have to my main concern should be because I designed it. I'm not designing data, but I present the data to users.
So data visualization is what you're doing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But what's the main concern should be what I see is big numbers, but I don't.
Big numbers, pie charts, and these kind of things.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I think when it comes to data visualization, the first and foremost thing that you need to keep in mind is, again, I think Aras also mentioned in his talk, is understanding the user, right? So a lot of the times what happens is businesses want to show certain information to the users. They say, no, this is what I want to show on my dashboard. Yeah. What they forget is the users are using that information, which is the least. And I'll give you an example. We work with road and transport authorities in Dubai. And again, this may be a little relevant to you because this is actually data visualization. So they had 143 services that they wanted to cramp in their app. They already had an app. And on the first screen, they had something called Renew Driving License. Now, Renew Driving License as a business is a very important service, right? When we did user studies, we found out, and it was in a way common sense, that you only renew your license after 10 years. But it was still there on the first screen. When we used data, when we used user interviews to actually show the stakeholders that, look, people really don't use this. People only have to use this after 10 years. That's where we were able to convince them. So I think even Aras mentioned in his presentation that please don't use the word research, because there are some people who actually get scared because of that. And then they will get their market research teams involved, and then you'll have a completely different discussion with them. I think time is up, so thank you again. Thank you, everybody.